Welcome back, everybody. Today we'll be taking a look at A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas.
Oh yeah, this one seems to have really captured the imaginations of a lot of readers out there.
Yeah, for sure. And we're going to try to figure out why that is today.
We've got a ton of reviews to dig into, so let's see what we can uncover.
All right, so for those who haven't read it yet, what's the story about?
Well, we meet Fair, a young woman who's just trying to survive. You know, she's hunting in the woods, trying to feed her family when she kills a fairy.
Oh, that can't be good.
Not in a world of magic and fairies, no. So as punishment, she's taken captive by this powerful beast-like fairy named Tamlin.
So it's kind of a Beauty and the Beast thing.
Yeah, you could say that, but with a fairy twist, of course. He brings her to Prythian, this whole hidden realm ruled by fairies. And she's thrown into this world of magic and courtly intrigue.
Sounds intense. So what did people think about this whole setup?
Well, a lot of readers were really impressed with Maas's writing style. They said it was really immersive. You know, they were captivated by the descriptions of Prythian, the different fairy courts, and the characters.
That's cool. I always love when an author can really paint a picture with their words.
Yeah, me too. And a lot of people even mention, you know, neglecting their real-life responsibilities because they were so hooked on the story.
Wow, that says something.
It is. And a lot of the praise is directed at Fair and her character arc. You know, readers really love how she transforms from this fearful girl into a powerful fairy warrior.
Yeah, that's always a satisfying journey to follow. That transition from victim to taking control.
Exactly. And it's not just about physical strength either. She uses her intelligence, her cunning to navigate all the challenges of Prythian. She stands up to those in power even when it's dangerous.
She's a character who really resonates with readers.
Definitely. Now, of course, not everyone loved everything about the book.
Right, because that's how it always is.
Some reviewers felt like the pacing was a bit uneven, especially in the beginning.
What do you mean?
Well, they felt like it took too long for the main conflict to get going.
Ah, so it was a slow burn.
Yeah, exactly. And while some people loved all the detailed world building in those early chapters, others just found it frustrating.
They just wanted to get to the action.
Right. And the romance between Fair and Tamlin, that seems to be a bit divisive too.
How so?
Well, some readers loved the slow burn attraction and the eventual relationship. That "I love you," he whispered and licked my brow line. Seemed to really stick with people.
Okay, I can see how that would be memorable.
But some people felt like the romance was a little predictable, maybe even lacking depth compared to Maas's later work.
Interesting. So it sounds like there are some differing opinions on the romantic aspect of the story.
For sure. Now, we should probably talk about Fair's sisters, Nesta and Elaine.
Oh yeah, I saw some things about them in the reviews.
A lot of readers found them pretty unsympathetic. Actually, some even found them annoying.
Really? Why is that?
They felt like their actions were selfish and didn't really add anything to the plot.
Interesting. So not everyone's a fan of the sisters.
Not exactly. But, you know, every story needs its supporting characters.
Right, even if they're not always the most likable.
Exactly. Now, before we get into some more serious analysis, I wanted to bring up this one review that caught my eye.
Oh yeah, what was that?
It compared the book to Shrek.
Wait, Shrek? The movie?
Yeah, and it used the Office memes to illustrate how the characters would react to certain situations.
Wow, that's a unique take.
It is. But what's really interesting is that despite all the humor, it still manages to capture the essence of the story.
That's cool. So it's like they took something potentially intimidating, like high fantasy, and made it relatable through pop culture.
Yeah, exactly. It shows that there are all sorts of ways to engage with a story.
And that sometimes it's okay to have a little fun with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But even with all the jokes, the review doesn't shy away from some of the darker elements of the book.
Like what?
Well, things like captivity manipulation, the struggle for freedom, you know, those themes are all still there.
So it's like a balance between lightheartedness and acknowledging the serious stuff.
Right. It's a good reminder that even within a fairy tale framework, there can be some pretty complex issues at play.
Absolutely. So I guess the question is A Court of Thorns and Roses more lighthearted entertainment or something deeper?
That's a great question. And to answer that, we need to look at some of the more nuanced aspects of the story, starting with the theme of freedom versus captivity.
Okay, yeah, that's a big one, especially for Fair.
Right. She begins the story trapped by her circumstances. You know, she's hunting to survive, she's supporting her family, she's a captive to her responsibilities.
And then she's literally taken captive by Tamlin.
Exactly. And at first, Prythian seems like an escape. It's beautiful. It's full of wonder.
But it has its own forms of captivity, right?
Oh, absolutely. She's constantly being watched. Her movements are restricted, her choices are limited. She's expected to conform to Tamlin's expectations and the rules of fairy society.
So it's like she trades one cage for another.
Exactly, and that realization is what fuels her rebellion.
She starts to push back against Tamlin.
Yeah, she starts to question his decisions, assert her own desires. It's a gradual process, but she becomes more confident, more assertive.
So she's not just fighting for physical freedom, but for the freedom to make her own choices.
Right, and that's a theme that I think resonates with a lot of people.
Absolutely. Now that brings us to the question of true love. What about the relationship between Fair and Tamlin? Is it healthy?
That's one of the most debated aspects of the book. Some readers see Tamlin as this classic romantic hero. He's tortured, but ultimately loves and protects Fair.
But others see him as possessive and controlling.
Right. They question whether his love for her actually allows her to be herself.
It's interesting how the same character can be interpreted in such different ways.
It is. It really speaks to the complexity of the story. And it makes you think about what a healthy relationship really looks like.
Definitely. Now, we've talked about Fair and Tamlin, but there are a lot of other important characters in the story, too.
Oh, yeah, for sure. We could spend hours talking about all of them.
Maybe we will.
Yeah.
But for now, let's focus on a few key players, starting with Lucien Tamlin's emissary.
What do you want to know about him?
Well, what did the reviews say about him?
Well, he's often described as witty and cunning, but also intensely loyal to Tamlin.
Even when he disagrees with him.
Yeah, even then. He often provides a more balanced perspective on things.
So he's kind of like the voice of reason.
You could say that readers appreciate his humor, his intelligence, and the fact that he seems to genuinely care for Fair.
He sounds like a good guy to have on your side.
Definitely. And his role becomes even more important in the later books.
Oh, intriguing.
Yeah.
Right, so then there's Rhysand, the High Lord of the Night Court. He seems to be a fan favorite.
He is. He's shrouded in mystery and darkness, and there's a real sense of danger surrounding him.
So, a bit of a bad boy?
Yeah, you could say that. And his interactions with Fair are full of tension.
Is there a love triangle?
Well, let's just say that their relationship is complicated.
Okay, so maybe not a straightforward love triangle, but definitely some romantic tension.
Right, and he becomes a really important character in the later books.
Okay, I can see why people are so drawn to him. He sounds like a real game changer.
He is. Now, speaking of Rhysand and the Night Court, one of the things that Maas does really well is play with the theme of truth versus illusion.
How so?
Well, the fairy world is full of glamour and deception. Fair is constantly having to question what she sees and what she's told.
So it's like she's learning to trust her instincts.
Exactly. And that's a valuable skill to have both in the fairy world and in real life.
Absolutely. Now, before we wrap up this first part of our discussion, I wanted to touch on the world building itself. What did readers think of Prythian?
They loved it. It's described as this vast, intricate realm with 7 distinct courts, each ruled by a powerful High Lord.
So a lot of variety.
Tons. And each court has its own unique culture, landscape, magical abilities.
It sounds like a world ripe for exploration.
It is, and Maas does a fantastic job of gradually revealing its intricacies.
So it's not just info dumping, it's like peeling back the layers of an onion.
Exactly. And the magic system is really interesting too. It's not just a tool or a power source. It's an integral part of the world, tied to the land, to nature, to the very essence of the Fae.
So it's not just about waving a wand and making things happen.
No, it's much more nuanced than that. And it can be used for both good and evil.
So there's a moral complexity to it.
Right. And that complexity extends to the characters themselves. Some embrace their magic fully, others are more cautious.
It's a reminder that power can be a double-edged sword.
Exactly. And that brings us to the broader conflicts that unfold in Prythian.
What do you mean?
Well, the fairy realm might seem idyllic on the surface, but there's a lot of darkness lurking beneath.
Like what?
There's a history of violence, oppression. The threat of war is always present.
So it's not all sunshine and rainbows.
No, it's not. And as the story progresses, Fair is forced to confront some uncomfortable truths about this world.
It sounds like a really layered and complex story.
It is, and we've only just scratched the surface.
Right. We still have so much more to discuss.
Well, then I guess we better keep going.
Sounds good to me. I'm ready for more.
Me too. Let's dive back in. Okay, so we left off talking about the darker side of Prythian, and I think that ties into this whole theme of beauty and illusion that Maas plays with.
Right. It's like she's showing us that pretty things aren't always what they seem.
Exactly. The fairies, they're beautiful, they're alluring, but there's this this deceptive quality to them, too. Like, their beauty can be a mask.
Hiding something darker underneath.
Exactly. And Faerie, starts out totally captivated by the glamour of it all, but then as she sees the reality, the consequences of power, her perception changes.
She starts to see that real beauty is about strength and integrity.
Right. And that's a pretty powerful message, I think, especially for younger readers.
For sure. Now, you mentioned the fairy courts and how each one represents a different facet of fairy nature.
Yeah, and we talked a bit about the spring court where Fair spends a lot of time. It's all about natural beauty, and Tamlin embodies that wild energy.
But even there's this undercurrent of tension and control.
Right. Tamlin's very protective of Fair, but he also makes a lot of decisions for her without her consent.
So it raises questions about agency and consent even in this fantasy world.
Exactly. And as the story goes on, Fair starts to challenge those power dynamics.
She wants to be an equal partner, not just a possession.
Exactly. And that leads to her eventually leaving the spring court.
And heading to the night court, ruled by Rhysand.
Oh yeah, speaking of Rhysand.
We can't talk about this book without addressing the love triangle.
Oh no, the love triangle. It's definitely a source of much debate.
So we have Tamlin, who at first seems like the perfect romantic hero.
The classic beast figure.
Right, but then we see his possessive side, his controlling behavior.
And Fair starts to question everything.
Then enters Rhysand, who's completely different.
Confident, cunning, powerful.
The bad boy.
Yeah, and there's this immediate tension between him and Fair.
So is it a love triangle or something more?
Well, it's definitely more than just a simple rivalry. It represents Fair's own struggle between the familiar and the unknown, between safety and freedom.
So it's not just about who she ends up with. It's about her own journey of self-discovery.
Right. And that struggle for autonomy is a major theme in the book.
Fair's constantly having to make choices with huge consequences.
Not just for herself, but for the whole of Prythian.
It shows that even in a world of magic and fairies, choices matter.
They do. Now we should probably talk about the ending.
Oh yeah, without giving anything away, what did people think?
Well, it's safe to say that Maas leaves readers wanting more.
A classic cliffhanger.
Kind of. It ties up some loose ends, but also sets the stage for the next book.
So it's both satisfying and frustrating at the same time.
Exactly. And that's what makes Maas such a good writer. She knows how to keep people hooked.
And this is just the first book in a whole series.
Oh yeah, there's a whole world to explore.
So for those who love this book, there's a lot more to come.
Definitely. Now, before we move on, I wanted to circle back to that Shrek and the Office review.
Right, the one that compared Tamlin to Shrek.
Yeah, it might seem silly, but it actually highlights something important about storytelling.
What's that?
Well, the fact that we can connect these characters to these pop culture figures shows that there are certain archetypes that we all recognize.
So even in a fantasy world, there are human experiences that we can relate to.
Right. And it's a reminder that there are many ways to enjoy a story.
Sometimes a little humor can help us connect with a book on a deeper level.
Exactly. And it shows that reading is an active process. We're not just passively absorbing information, we're making connections, drawing comparisons, finding our own interpretations.
And that's what makes it so rewarding.
Now, as we wrap up this part of the discussion, I want to ask you, what do you think is the lasting impact of this story?
I think for a lot of readers, especially young women, Fair's journey is really inspiring.
Oh, so.
She goes from being timid and self-doubting to becoming this powerful warrior.
And she does it on her own terms.
Right. She makes mistakes, she learns, she grows, and she ultimately embraces her power.
It's a story about finding your voice and fighting for what you believe in.
And that's a message that resonates far beyond the world of Prythian.
Absolutely. It's about empowerment and resilience.
And it's a reminder that even in the face of adversity, we have the power to choose our own path.
So even though A Court of Thorns and Roses is a fantasy, it's also a story about the human condition.
About our hopes, our fears, our desires.
And about the enduring power of hope and resilience.
Wow. It's amazing how much there is to unpack with this book.
Right. And it seems like everyone has such strong feelings about it one way or another.
Definitely. Either you love it or you have some issues with it.
But even the people who have criticisms, they're still engaged. They're thinking about it.
And not just brushing it off.
Exactly. And I think that's a testament to Maas's skill as a writer.
She creates this world that sucks you in, even if you have some problems with it.
It's familiar in some ways, but also completely unique.
Yeah. And she's not afraid to take those fairy tale tropes and twist them a little bit, make them darker.
Right. Like with Tamlin, we think he's this classic hero, but then...
It turns out to be a little more complicated.
More than a little, I'd say. His possessiveness, his controlling behavior, it definitely challenges the idea of him as this perfect romantic figure.
Makes you think about those darker sides of relationships, even the ones that seem really passionate.
For sure. And fair, too. She's not this perfect heroine.
Which is refreshing.
Totally.
Yeah.
She makes mistakes. She's impulsive. She has insecurities.
She's human.
Exactly. And that's what makes her growth so powerful.
And relatable, too, I think.
Definitely. And speaking of power, that's such a big theme in the book.
Right, we see it in so many different forms. Physical strength, magic, political influence.
But Maas also shows us the dangers of power, how it can corrupt, how it can be used to hurt people.
It's definitely a cautionary tale.
And one that feels very relevant to the world we live in.
For sure. But even with all that darkness, there's also this sense of hope.
Right. Fair's journey is ultimately about breaking free from those constraints.
Finding her own strength.
Choosing her own destiny.
It's inspiring.
And it reminds us that even when things seem impossible, we still have choices.
We can fight for what we believe in.
We can make a difference.
Yeah, that's a powerful message.
So if you haven't read A Court of Thorns and Roses yet, I highly recommend giving it a try.
It's definitely a book that will stay with you.
And for those who have read it, what did you think? What resonated with you the most? What did you struggle with?
Let us know in the comments.
And as always, if there's a book you'd like us to cover in a future episode, tell us about it.
And don't forget, you can sign up for a free trial on Audible using the link in the description.
You'll get 2 free audiobooks to start your listening journey.
So what are you waiting for?
Thanks for joining us today. We had a great time discussing A Court of Thorns and Roses.
And we'll see you next time for another deep dive.